So I've been playing a lot of Project Zomboid. And it's also been a little bit since my last Hero Forge video, so I figured what better way to get back into it than by combining the two. Today I'm going to be building my character and my girlfriend's character from our current multiplayer world in Project Zomboid. For my character, I am a lumberjack and my girlfriend is a DIY expert. Those were our starting careers. We were able to clear out the Rosewood Fire Department and we've kind of been trying to build that up as our base. We've been going through, getting rid of zombies, clearing out nearby buildings, trying to get as many supplies as we can. We just recently lost power and water though in that world, so we definitely have some challenges ahead. But we're in a pretty good position. We've got the fire department walled off, barricaded. We've got some water collection containers out by the front door. And then towards the back in that open field, if you're familiar with that, we've set up a walled off garden. So we're looking to be pretty sustainable, but yeah, we definitely have a lot of challenges kind of ahead. We still have to figure out how to build a well. Some generators are going to definitely be a must, but overall we're in a pretty good starting position. And for my character as the lumberjack, I was definitely trying to go for sort of a rugged look. Pretty much since the start of spawn, I've had a green flannel, the lumberjack shirt, and I have some baggy jeans. I found some combat boots, and then my character also has the nearsighted trait, so my prescription glasses have also been a must pretty much the entire game. I spawned in with those and I've never taken them off on my own. They got smacked off by a zombie one time, but yeah, I definitely try to have those on at all times. Finding the fire department was huge as a lumberjack as well. I have a fire axe that's been my main weapon and I have a few more stockpiled just in case. That's definitely been my main tool both for killing zombies and also chopping wood, getting logs and firewood, things like that. I was also able to find a zombie that had a hiking backpack, like that big tall backpack. So that was huge for me as kind of a supply runner, resource gatherer. So I wanted to include that. I was looking for a pose that I felt like could hold both the axe and the backpack in a way that looked cool. Right now I'm kit bashing using the one of the backpack models and then also a belt. The belt I'm kind of carefully positioning, having it clip into the backpack and just sticking out a little bit in front just so it looks kind of like a backpack strap, trying to hide the rest of it because with that one specifically it has like a big buckle and things like that. I wanted to hide that and just have the strap. I think it's coming out pretty good. I'm just kind of fine-tuning his positioning, making him look like he's holding the strap on one arm. And then my other hand, I'm trying to get the fire axe positioned. The axe model that Hero Forge has is kind of old. It's from when their older art style was a lot chunkier, not as realistic. So I'm kit bashing one so that I can fine-tune it, trying to make it a little longer and a little thinner. And I'm just kind of trying to find that sweet spot where it doesn't look too extreme or in one or the other. And now I'm also adding a fanny pack. So that was something I found pretty early on as well, luckily. And that's been super nice to have just for simple, kind of small, essential things that don't take up too much space and I can keep separate. I'm using kit bashing for that as well. The fanny pack itself was really easy just because it has its own actual model. You don't have to kind of create anything to get the actual fanny pack pouch part. The belt is a little more tricky. I was just finding different belt options and then connecting them, resizing and re-angling them until it seemed like a pretty good fit. That part's not anything too complicated though, just some kind of basic kit bashing, trying to get the angle right so it's a little dynamic and visually interesting. Now moving on to kit bashing a bandana. So I was trying to level up my tailoring, so I was doing a lot of random little rag creations. I made like bandanas and different things like that. That's also why I have the hand wraps. I was just basically trying to make a bunch of different stuff using rags. So it's a lot of just like plain or white accessories like bandana and hand wraps and things like that. Overall though, at this point, the bulk of it's done in terms of the actual modeling and posing. So now I'm moving on to the coloring. And what I always like to do is use a default color palette. I just find that it makes it a lot easier and faster to do the coloring when you're working with an already pre-existing palette. Even though I retain pretty much nothing from whatever the default palettes are, at least since it assigns correct colors to different categories, so like leather, cloth, metal all have their own paints, I can pretty easily swap everything out without having to kind of one by one go through each section when it's unpainted. So what I'm doing here is just picking from my library. I've gotten a lot of random things down already, so that has sped up the process a lot too. I'm not spending as much time fine-tuning and customizing specific colors. I'll have just basically main colors that, if needed, I'll kind of modify a little bit. But for the most part, I'm kind of sticking to what I've already made and assembled. Just kind of piecing everything together as it would make sense, following along with my character model, but sometimes taking creative liberties as well. Now I'm just adding some facial details, some stubble, freckles, eye bags, things like that. Just little things that will give more life and character and depth to the model. Everything looks a bit saturated now, but that's because I have plans later to get everything a little more grimy looking to match the apocalyptic aesthetics that the game has. But for now, I'm moving on to the actual flannel pattern. And like I mentioned earlier, I have a lot of colors saved that I'll just modify as needed. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. I took my base green that I have saved and just modified it a few times by making copies, some lighter, some darker, just to get that plaid pattern looking good. It's a bit subtle, but it really does add a lot once it's all coming together. Now I'm just doing some fine-tuning of the posing, working on the head, and then more specifically now the expression and just the more minor facial movements. I'm trying to get to something, like I've said earlier, a little dynamic, a little kind of rugged looking. For the most part though, he's just about done. Here I'm just experimenting with some different shirt designs. I ended up not actually doing anything with that. Eventually it just gets erased again and it's a blank t-shirt, but just looking at more decals as a whole. So now I'm looking at blood stains on the axe. Definitely have used it to kill a lot of zombies, so that seemed important to add. It's a little tricky finding a shade of red that would be visibly distinct from the red metal of the axe, so I was just fine-tuning those shades as well. And here's where I mentioned earlier about a way to get everything desaturated. I took a dirt stain, just made it really large, and had a kind of grayish dark brown color, and that does a lot to give that aesthetic because it's pretty transparent, so it's not actually fully turning anything completely that color, but it does a really nice job of giving everything a sort of asymmetrical, weathered look. I like it because it's different than just fully making a desaturated green flannel. It has some spots where it's more noticeable than others. It makes it really just realistic and very grimy looking, but it did in some ways impact things too much. So here I'm kind of fine-tuning some more things. Like I wanted his hair to be ginger still, but with that decal I felt like it made it a little too brown looking. So I'm just fine-tuning the colors again, seeing some changes. This is where I decided to finally get rid of that t-shirt design. But for the most part, he is all done now. Just doing some other last minute things before I finish up his model and move on to the next one. Another thing I've done to speed up the process of making Hero Forge models is I have new base models that I have saved that I use as my default. I realized that a not insignificant amount of time was spent taking the default mini that you start with and giving it more realistic proportions and muscle mass and things like that I always kind of more or less have the same throughout minis. I'll obviously like fine-tune height and size of different things depending on who exactly I'm making, but for the most part I'm never gonna use the true like default models that you start with whenever you make a new one. So instead I just have these base kind of mannequin basically of pretty realistic human proportions that I'll make copies of instead. So that's what I used for both of these models, and that definitely speeds up the process for me. But going back to Project Zomboid, in our server my girlfriend has been wearing a lot of firefighter gear. Right now she's wearing firefighter pants, and then she has some heavy duty boots. But she doesn't usually wear the jacket too much just because of heat. So usually she wears just the plain black crop top that she's had for pretty much the whole game. So I wanted to include that instead because I do think it also looks a little visually interesting compared to just being like fully kitted up in something pretty bulky. Also within Hero Forge, there's not really too much firefighter specific gear. Like there's not the helmet that she would usually wear. So instead I opted for a bandana just as something more lightweight. She has one in the game, but then also in real life. So it seemed like a pretty cool sort of Easter egg, just sort of a little nod to that. As a DIY expert, she's also been doing a lot of construction and deconstruction around Rosewood. So I wanted to be sure to include her hammer that she's using all the time. I'm also, in her other hand, giving her a duffel bag. That's something that we found actually surprisingly late in the game, so that's kind of something I gave to her once I found that. And within Hero Forge, both the hammer and duffel bag models are actually pretty good. So I just used their actual gear in her hands. It's not kit bashed, but I am kit bashing an armband to look like she's bandaging like a scratch or a cut or something, just to give some sort of visual dynamics there. Especially since she's wearing a crop top with its skin exposed, it seemed like a cool way to show off some more kind of character detailing. To make that, I just shrunk down a bandaged torso model and put that around her arm, and then also found like a necktie model and shrunk that down as well, just to have the like exposed knot at the end so it looks like rags were wrapped around and then tied. And with that, the bulk of her model is all done, posing and everything. Now moving on to colors. Following that same kind of work process that I did with the other model. That's basically how I model everything. I'll just make like I'll choose a random pre-made palette and then just kind of shift all the colors as I see fit. And for the pants that I chose for her character, they're actually from the older era where a lot of Hero Forge assets were pretty chunky and cartoony looking. But for this specific case, I felt like it actually worked out in my favor. Because they are shaped like that, they actually worked pretty well as like baggy padded firefighter pants. They're supposed to be like military pants, but the paneling and the straps I felt like worked well. That paneling on the front, because I colored it to be kind of glossy and black, actually works pretty well, I feel like, as knee pads, which are also built into her character model. So overall, I kind of liked how that turned out, especially with the boots I chose that kind of blend in with the pants as well. And I had mentioned earlier that I used the base model hammer and duffel bag, but I forgot that I actually swapped out the hammer for a kit bashed claw hammer, just because I liked that look a little more than the ball peen hammer. Claw hammer just has sort of a classic construction vibe, I guess, so I went with that instead. Shrunk it down in kit bashing just because that model is a bit chunkier than the other one. But other than that, I'm just doing some fine tuning of the pose. Got her bandana and hair chosen, getting the expression down, giving her sort of a gruff and tough look as well. Doing some decaling. It's pretty subtle, but where the bandage is, I decided to give her sort of a bruise just to look like it is really an injury that's getting wrapped up. So I picked one of the blotchy decals and just made a very purple tinted mark where that bandage is. It's pretty subtle, especially once I add the dust overlay that I had with my other character. But I do like those kind of little touches that give more life. Other than that, I'm just doing the fine tuning of the pose, getting all the arms, the back, basically just every joint in a good spot. There isn't really any exciting commentary to add to this. It's basically just a lot of tedious back and forth, looking at the pose from different angles until I feel like it looks both interesting and realistic. Here, I'm taking the bandana and giving it a texture just to give it a little bit more realism, something that kind of just looks like it might be like thread or something like that. Pretty subtle. And now I'm just going over getting some of the accessories in that I thought maybe would be missing. I'm looking at different glove options here. So these ones are gardening gloves, but I decided to opt for these like fingerless leather gloves instead. I took some creative liberties when I was adding that, but I just thought it kind of matched the color palette and overall aesthetic. And now I'm using that same tactic to get everything a little grimier and desaturated looking. I'm using a slightly different shade just to give them some differentiation. I feel like it works better with their respective color palettes. But now they are basically done. I'm just posing them together and doing some fine tuning in that regard so that they aren't clipping or interacting weird next to each other. I'm basically just trying to make them look pretty cohesive. That's one thing that can be kind of tricky when making two minis like this. Side by side, you can kind of get lost in each one, but if the color palettes are too different in terms of like their shading, or if one looks a little more cartoony than the other, if one's more realistic than the other, things like that can be a little difficult. But after some fine tuning, I really liked how it turned out. And now I'm just in the booth changing the lighting in the background, things like that, because next up I'm just getting the screenshots that are more in-depth and with better lighting. So I want to make sure everything looks good there. I'm choosing the environment as well. That is surprisingly huge when it comes to the final screenshots. The environment can add a lot, especially with any metallic or reflective surfaces, but also just the kind of general ambient lighting. So that's really the last step before I start getting the more high resolution screenshots. And without further ado, here are those screenshots now. Overall, I really like how both of these models came out, and making them was a lot of fun. Because Project Zomboid has such a low poly aesthetic, it meant that even though there was something to base off of, I was still able to make a lot of creative decisions over facial features and some of those smaller details like that. Plus, I was able to use kit bashing in a lot of kind of subtle but pretty interesting ways, which I thought was a lot of fun. But that's about it for this video. It was definitely longer than a lot of ones I've made in the past, so if you've made it this far, thanks for watching and hope to see you in the next one.